Okay, I'm reading on chapter 4, Search Me and Know Me, Confession of Praying Like Monks and Living Like Fools. Psalm 139 1, You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. October 31st, 1995. It was Halloween. I was a second grader boarding the school bus and dreaming of a month's supply of candy. I happened to grab a seat next to a neighbor who was in kindergarten at the time. I was carrying a good deal of pride that day because I had recently completed my first ever chapter book from cover to cover. The Scholastic Book Fair had rolled through sometime in September. Somehow that little setup of cardboard cutouts in the library was like a mirage in the desert. Never were elementary schoolers so thirsty to read, mark their page with a super cool bookmark, and pick just the right obnoxiously large, loud, colorful cap eraser for their number 2 pencil. I was no different. When the Scholastic Book Fair was in town, I was briefly transformed into a bookworm with a fire burning in me that only well-written fiction could satisfy. With Halloween around the corner, naturally, I picked out the last offering from the Goosebumps franchise. Later that day in class, I leafed forward to see how many pages were left in Chapter 1. I was on page 3 and already growing bored, wondering if I had the stamina for this journey of adolescent horror. As fate would have it, at the very moment, Jacqueline approached my desk with about 5 books in hand. Tyler, what chapter are you on? Chapter 1. I just started. Oh, great. I love chapter books. That's what she called them. Let me know if you like it. It was at that precise moment I was certain I did possess the stamina for this horror journey. I had a crush on Jacqueline. Secretly, I suspect every boy in the class did. And if this book was the way to a lengthier interaction, I was ready to burn a bubble bath, light a few aromatherapy candles, brew a cup of chamomile tea, and settle in for a sophisticated evening with my first ever chapter book. I finished it several weeks later. Jacqueline never asked me about it again. I went back to television immediately after. But then Halloween rolled around. I sat down at the bus, turned the next kid to me and asked, Want to hear a ghost story? Sure. Over the next 15 minutes, I proceeded to recount every detail of that Goosebumps plot in accordance with my memory. I wrapped up just as we made it to his stop a couple blocks before mine. By the time I opened my front door, his mom had already called my mom with the news. Your son told my son a ghost story, and he was so afraid he came out shaking and crying. I have a vivid recollection of that day because it's the first time I can remember feeling the deep sense of guilt. 2 pages of it. Something I had done with honest intentions without aiming to scare or hurt had produced pain in the life of another. How could that be? In high school, I had a temper so bad I was prone to outbursts. I got so angry at my younger brother that I punched a hole in the wall in my own bedroom. We never got it fixed. Just covered it with a Bob Dylan poster and pretended it didn't happen. In college, I was out on my own for the first time, which brought all of my buried insecurities to the surface. The most effective means I found for wrapping security around my suddenly exposed and fragile sense of self was gossip. As long as I stayed on the side of mocking others behind their backs, I felt all right, comfortable in my own skin, included and accepted. In my early 20s, I dealt with a pornography addiction. I call it an addiction, not a struggle, because it went well beyond the bounds of my willpower. I didn't want to do it, but there I was, in my dorm room in Bible college, right after finishing up an essay on Romans, Googling something on my laptop again. And it just didn't go away when I became a pastor, by the way. As I as I can also recall in equally vivid detail the heavy blanket of shame I wrapped myself in on Wednesday nights as a young youth pastor when, after preaching sermons to middle and high school students, I found myself staring lustfully at the glow of my iPhone screen before falling asleep. I can remember praying theologically misguided but sincere prayers such as, God, please don't penalize those kids because of my failure. Didn't go away when I got married either. Your fiance discovered unflattering searches on your internet history is one thing. Then follow-up conversation is awful. But confessing this, you still find yourself typing those same words into the same search engines a year into your marriage is another. But unlocking your phone to see what she left, to see that she left the internet history open, knowing she snuck a moment to check up on you, is another thing entirely. It's at the point you realize that your struggle has ripped distress through the relationship you care about most and produced pain and insecurity in the person you love dearly. Confession and the feelings of guilt and shame that often precede it get less cute as you grow up. When a misguided goosebumps recap matures into a marital fracture, it doesn't read nearly as charming. It's been more than a decade since any form of disembodied lust was a struggle for me on any level. I found what Scripture calls victory in that area of my life. I've also found that God has flooded my life with people who have been right in the thick of identical secret struggle, because it's our wounds that God often uses to heal others, not our competencies. As of this moment, it's impatience and anger that have a hold on me, which has the potential to sound okay if you keep it general, a well-cultivated habit of Christian pastors. But if you were in the room for some of the petty arguments I started with my wife, or some of the moments in which rage spilled out of me, directed at my toddler-aged children, it wouldn't seem so general. 10 days prior to this writing, the community I pastor gathered for midnight prayer and worship to start an incredible season of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unceasing prayer revival. Right, come on. But that very day I yelled at my son Hank 3 separate times, and I had promised myself I wasn't going to use that form of discipline anymore, because for me it's about me releasing my anger and not teaching him. And in the minutes before I walked through the church door for that first midnight hour of prayer, I was walking down the sidewalk in an argument with Kirsten because I so mishandled a vulnerability on her part. Now she's in tears because my response was the worst possible response. Revival, right, come on. No, I showed up that night, defeated and in need. Merciful God, meet me here with your mercy. That's what I was whispering under my breath in the front row of the prayer meeting I was leading. And God did meet me, not because of me, but in spite of me. I need you to unequivocally know, dear reader, that I am on the confessor side of this equation, not the absolver side. You probably already know that there is nothing different about me, and you know when it comes to the need to confess. But it's important for you to know that I know that too. Next part is confession is a slow dance. Picture yourself at a wedding reception with a bunch of friends, but no date, tearing up the dance floor to the tune of Ariana Grande, Justin Bieber, and a crowd-pleasing throwback from Salt and Pepper. If you're having that kind of night, confession is the DJ slowing things down with The Way You Look Tonight, or a track from Al Green's Deep Cuts. It's not surprising. I figured out we were going here, but I'm not particularly excited about it. I'll use this 4-minute window to catch my breath and refresh my beverage. Psalm 24 is a song composed by David for the sake of celebration. It begins, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. for he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. And it concludes in a repeated declaration. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. It's a triumphant crowd pleaser, which is what makes these lines from verses 2 and 3 so seem out of place. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. Comparatively speaking, those lines are a bit of a downer, wouldn't you agree? It's the DJ switching to a slow jam and the dance floor clearing out. David has a habit of doing this. He is the author of most of the Psalms and he writes plenty of hits, but he tends always to sneak in a line or two that a savvy record label would cut. Subtext is, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? The one with clean hands and a pure heart. And that's not me. I imagine David whispered that line in defeat so many times before he sang it loudly and triumphantly. David wanted the presence of God more than anything, which meant that he was washed in God's holiness and at the same time confronted by his own fallenness. If it's the presence of the living God you want, confession is part of the deal. A really good part of the deal. Sin is simultaneously the most controversial idea in Christianity and the one most universally agreed upon, even outside the church. In his seminal work titled Orthodoxy, G.K. Chesterton called sin the only part of Christian theology that can really be proved. 2 years after that statement, Chesterton published another book, this one titled What's Wrong with the World? The year was 1910, and there was plenty of talk of social progress in the West. He handled his own voice to that progressive conversation, stating in summary, you're after the right things, but you're ignoring a key part of the diagnosis. What's with the world? Was his question. And his answer was simply this: I am wrong. I'm what's wrong with the world. The world doesn't get sorted unless I do. And that is actually not a primitive, conservative religious idea. Freud, Plato, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and Jesus all agreed on that point. Just to name a handful. Everyone agrees there's something wrong with the world. Everyone. The difference in philosophies and religions often come down to what vocabulary is used to describe the world's brokenness and the way this brokenness gets mended. Sin is the precise point where historical eras, cultures, and philosophies all find agreement. Sin is also hugely controversial. It's been so abused and manipulated over the years that for some, the moment this tiny 3-letter word appears on the page, it is minimized to a single subjective and often very legitimately painful experience. The biblical idea of sin is not simple. It's massively broad. Bible scholars who have pointed to 8 different Hebrew words used in the Bible, all translated with the one English word sin. The broad biblical definition is given in the form of a story, not a statement. In the Bible's opening pages, man and woman are described as naked and unashamed. That's about a lot more than physical nudity or hippie liberation. It's about the state of their souls. Flip the page, and the story turns out what's commonly referred to as the fall. Sin plunges into human history. Believing in the existence of God was never really been a hang-up for us humans. Across cultures and eras, the existence of something bigger than us has always been the popular opinion. Even today, in a post-Enlightenment, highly skeptical society bent on deconstruction The majority of people believe in some kind of deity who is running the show. The hang-up is, and always has been, trusting the God we believe exists. Pretty early on in the story, Adam and Eve started to suspect that God was holding out on them. They plucked the forbidden fruit and attempted to get a full, abundant, happy life apart from God. They trusted themselves, not the God they believed in, and that is what the Bible calls sin. Good desire channeled through the wrong means. Sin is shorthand for any attempt to meet our deep needs by our own resources. The instinctive human response to sin is hiding. Right away, Adam and Eve realized they were naked and sewed fig leaves together to hide from each other. When they heard God's footsteps approaching, they even hid from God in the brush. Naked and unashamed instantly became covered and ashamed. God sees them hiding. Honestly, tough guy to play hide and seek with. And a bottom falls out of his stomach, verbalizing two questions. Where are you? There's a long interpretive tradition in Judaism and early Christianity that sees this first question as an invitation to confession. An invitation Adam and Eve don't take, leading to a second question. Who told you that you were naked? Said in the way God is asking, who stole my children's innocence? This observation is paramount and so frequently misconstrued. Sin, defined by the biblical imagination, is not an accusation or a condemnation. It is just a diagnosis. It's a trip to the doctor's office where you describe your symptoms and discover there's a name for this disease. The trouble with the disease is that it gets in the way of doing what we were made to do, namely, live free, healthy lives, using our bodies according to their design. The issue with sin isn't that God had us a tight moral grid and coloring within the lines is how we prove we're on His side. It's that sin inhibits us from doing what we were made to do best, love. To receive love and to give it. Why does sin interfere with love? Because, as Eugene Pett defines it, sin is a refused relationship with God that spills over into a wrong relationship with others. Sin is always personal, it's always against God. The way our sin hurts others is that the collateral of that first refusal, as David prays, against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. We do not sin against a rule or a law. We sin against our Father. Back to the drama of Genesis 3. The heartbreaking scene ends with the statement, God placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. Their entrance back into the full, free, abundant kind of life God made for us is guarded. Adam and Eve left the garden walking east, but they didn't go alone. God goes with them. He's not lowering the standard of holiness, but He is coming after us. The biblical story isn't one of a compromising God, it's one of a pursuing God. From there, the rest of the Bible is mostly picture after picture of God's pursuing love. Here's a summary of the whole 66 book compilation if you want to save yourself some time. I've got good news and bad news. Good news is your love. Loved right now without qualification or restriction. Loved unconditionally for who you are. Loved in a way you can't lose. Bad news is that you find it very hard to believe that and even harder to experience it. Your instinct is, and will forever be, to try to drum up your own lovableness to become lovable in some way you can define and control. To try to become in your own eyes what you are already in God's eyes. The good news is called grace. The bad news is called sin. I know painfully and personally what it feels like to all of a sudden be aware of my need for forgiveness. Falling on my face, defeated while accusing voices pound away inside my skull, I know the right. I'm not a man of clean hands and a pure heart. My real life is a mockery of who I want to be and wish I was. And there, in the midst of my exposed shame, I hear the rabbi whisper to me what he whispered to the adulterous woman. Neither do I condemn you. It's in John chapter 8. That love I can't seem to outrun it's the only powerful thing enough to change me. What if every time I found myself face down in shame, it's an opportunity to hear again his voice say, neither do I condemn you. What if the parts of our stories we'd like to erase become in the end the parts we tell forever? What if we find yourself there? It isn't an opportunity to clean yourself up, but instead to see yourself as you really are, as he's always seen you, and still hear him call you beloved. God didn't lower the standard of holiness. He found a way to make us holy that isn't dependent on our performance. Grace wins. And at the 21-minute mark, I am going to stop, take a break, and we'll see you on the upside. God bless.